Okay, great. Thanks for the reminder. Now we're saying that we've looked at written literature and we're turning, we've looked at oral literature, we're now turning to written literature. When we looked at oral literature, we started from the definition of literature itself, where we realized that it's an art form that is created by society, meant for the benefit of society, and it is language based. So everything we talk about is on language. It is produced through language. So it is a language or verbal product. So it is language that gives us that. So, and how is it transmitted through, through the word of mouth? It is verbal. That's basically what makes it. And I must have mentioned at some point that actually, as we talk about this literature, we have to remember again that it is usually performance, oriented. So it does not just come on its own, but we perform it. We create an environment that we use to share it with others. So it is artistic, it is performed. One thing I probably did not mention is that it's not always actually that we'll have, an audience for this literature, because it happens that the performer also plays the role of audience. That's what is interesting about African literature. And I think that is what we always need to remember. So we have this case where we cannot really separate, in theater, it is argued that there are only, there are three, elements of theater. That's the performer, the performance, and the audience. But then in African, performance, it's quite difficult for us to pinpoint that, to say here we have the performance, the performer, and the audience, because they usually get to be, to be tied together. So we'll have, for instance, in Vimboza dance, we'll have a Vimboza dancer, we'll have the drummer, we'll have the singer who also claps, and it is these same people who also happen to be the audience. So it's quite tricky. And I just want us to know that it's very difficult for us to look at this oral literature without paying attention to the environment that it is occurring in. In short, we cannot have a performance that is divorced from everything else. We cannot have a literary, a literary product that is divorced from the, from the space that is occurring in. So all these are, intricately tied. And, it's been argued actually that when you talk about African culture, you cannot separate one element from the other. So you cannot say here we are discussing the poem, because you realize that the poem has context. It is, it exists in a contextual space, and there has to be this relationship. So all the times, whatever we're going to talk about, we have to take into account the fact that there is this context that it is, it is existing in, and it's very important for us to remember that. So we looked at oral prose narratives, I think myths, we looked at legends, fables. We went on to look at urban legends. We talked about jokes. From there, we moved into poetry. We looked at both religious and non-religious or secular poetry, which gives us, give us a broader, interpretation of our society before we, branch off now to talk about riddles, proverbs, all those. So it's quite broad, and it is something that we have to remember. And it's important that every time we interact with others, we have to look out for all these poetic or literary elements that exist in our lives. So it's important that we always pay attention to this. This morning, I want us to move now to written literature. Since we have this understanding of oral literature, I think it's easy for us to proceed now to look at written literature, which we're going to discuss in general. Upon this general discussion, we're going to zero in on poetry. And once we are done, it will mean that we are done with our sessions. Then I will now tell you how you're going to access these videos. Okay, so, well, generally the definition they gave for literature already, and we all understand what literature is. And I actually mentioned it again this morning. Well, the same applies to written literature. The only difference between oral and written, that written literature is graphically represented, while oral literature is verbally produced, verbally performed. That's just, the difference. Otherwise, they're almost the same thing. So one is graphically, presented, while the other one is verbally presented. That's the only difference. It's the same thing. It's for this reason, actually, that you come across folk tales that have been transcribed and presented in written form. I personally do not take that to be written. I always take it to be oral as much as it has been, transcribed, because you find that there's the form that it gets, the way it appears, you can tell to say this is being told. It is an oral product. So we can always see these things. So that's the view that I have. And then this written literature, which we will encounter, comes in so many forms. And unfortunately, almost all the time we talk about written literature, people think that we're talking about, people think that that's what literature is, without taking into account the fact that actually literature can be oral, or it is basically oral before it becomes written. So the oral form is the primary one. The written form is secondary. And unfortunately, because we are moving now, from the pre-literate to the literate age, people think that the literate age is the age that we should be focusing on. I do not think so. I disagree with that view. My view is we have to focus on the basic, because it is the basic that defines the secondary. So without that basic, we'll not be able, to do the best that we can. So in what forms, in what types do we have this, written literature coming to us? There are basically three main types that come from literature. These being prose, poetry, and drama. So those are the three. So prose, poetry, and drama. And what really are these? My assumption is that you already have an idea of what this is. I'll give you an example. The novel, my assumption is that everyone here has read the novel before. Okay, so we have read novels. Now, the novel, it has other forms that when you see the novel, you can clearly tell that this is prose. What we mean is that this is narration. This is a story being told just upon looking at it. You can see that this is prose. So prose is basically narration. I must have mentioned this in our first lecture. So prose is narration, while poetry, on the other hand, is verse. So poetry is versified. It appears in verse form. And drama is basically dialogue. Okay?
Dialogue.
So drama is dialogue. So that is how they differ one from the other. Prose is narration, poetry is verse, and drama is dialogue. So we can clearly see the names of the characters and what they say. So it's just the name of the character and their words. That's what we have in drama. Of course, we also have stage directions and all that, but I think what is key is the dialogue. What is key is what is said, and that is what drives the story. In poetry, it is all versified, it is presented in verse, while prose is basically narration, the telling of a story. That's why you remember we had oral prose narratives where we're telling stories. Then we turn to songs where we perform in a special language, and from the language you can tell what really is being said. And then of course now we have drama, which I'm never going to discuss with you because it doesn't fall under me. So we have drama, which is taking the dialogue form. So those are the three forms that we have. Now I want us to go just a little further to have a broader look at each of these, and we'll start with prose. Okay, so prose basically takes two forms, and these two forms are fiction and non-fiction. So those are the two forms taken by prose. So it will either be fictive or it will be factual. So you see it, then you know this is fiction. If it's fiction, it means it's imaginary. It's created in one's mind. While if it's non-fiction, it means it's real, it's factual. Though of course I'll tell you I have my own views on that again, which I'll share with you very shortly. But yeah, basically, if it's non-fiction, it's factual. For example, I think on our reading list we have, The Promised Land by Barack Obama. That is non-fiction. It is not fiction. It is not imaginary. It is factual. It is written based on real experience. So the biography is a type of non-fiction. The essay which you are writing, which you will be writing, is part of nonfiction. Okay, the autobiography. Okay, the textbook. Though we don't really discuss textbooks as artwork, but when we talk about nonfiction here, we're looking at more, work that is somehow artistically written in a certain way. So it has, a level of art in it. Okay, it is artistic. It is literary in one way or another. Then on the other hand, we have fiction, and this fiction appears mostly. We discuss three. Of course, mostly I think there are two elements, okay, that we discuss. We usually discuss the short story and the novel. But then I do not want us to be restricted to that in thought. I would like us to go a little more than that. Okay, so we have the short story and the novel, which appears in nonfiction. But then I would like you to know that apart from that, we also have the novella. Okay, the novella is longer than the short story, while it is shorter than the novel. And then we have flash fiction, which is shorter than the short story. So all these are fiction, okay? So what is flash fiction? Flash fiction is usually presented in about 300 words. You have a complete story. If you went online and just punched flash fiction, you would come across countless stories that are told, in very few words. Well, the short story is usually a piece that is less than 20,000 words in length. It's got a limited, time of action. It usually happens in one place and the limited time of action, and it rarely has a plot. It usually has an incident, something that happens. All right? There's something that happens. The novella, on the other hand, is longer than the short story. So it's about 20,000 to 50,000 words in length. So 20,000 to 50,000 words, there we have the novella, more developed than the short story. And it has actually, a clear plot, and a number of events will take place in there, okay? A longer, time frame. And apart from that, it will have highly developed characters and complex characters. The novel, on the other hand, is the longest of the three. It's usually more than 50,000 words in length. So it's fully developed, all the characters, and it is argued that that's the easiest to write. It's easier to write the novel than it is to write a short story. That is what writers argue. So, well, basically, that is what we have under fiction. Okay, then on the other hand, we have poetry. Poetry, we've said, basically is verse. It is verse, and we'll discuss it more when we turn to poetry, which should be in the next video that we're going to have in the next lecture. Yeah, so poetry is versified, usually to be the narrative or dramatic. It could also be lyric. I think we'll discuss that more in the next discussion. But apart from poetry, we have drama. Drama, as I said at the beginning, uses dialogue to share meaning. So it's dialogic in nature. You have the name of the character and what the character says. And drama can be, comedy, it can be tragedy, it can be tragicomedy, it can be a history, a well-known historical narrative being told in dramatic form. For instance, in Zambia, we have The Lands of Kazembe by Andrea Masie. So Andrea Masie wrote The Lands of Kazembe. Shakespeare has very many dramatic, historical dramas. Julius Caesar, for instance, Richard III, Henry IV, Henry V, I think also, Henry VI. We have all those. So there are many histories, but we have tragedies, we have comedies, and as you get to drama, you'll notice that you're going to discuss this starting from ancient theater up to now. So these are some of the things that we're going to talk about. Next, we're going to discuss poetry in detail, and that is the subject of discussion for this morning. For now, we can break off up to the end of this discussion. Then we open up using, using the same link in the next few seconds. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.